to today's global issue discussion on carbon emissions at Albuquerque Academy. Today we are debating the pros and cons of market mechanisms as well as regulatory approaches. I am Noreen Kassam and my partner is Evan Carr. We will be speaking in favor of market mechanisms. Joining us will be David Leo and Emily Adkins. They will be speaking in favor of regulatory approaches. First, free market mechanisms are far more effective to tackle climate change than regulatory approaches because of the profit incentive. Market mechanisms such as carbon taxes and the cap-and-trade program are more open-ended and provide an ongoing profit motive to reduce emissions because it creates additional profits and tax reductions.
While that may be true to a certain degree, the fact is that emission standards are more stable than carbon markets. Emission trading markets can be unpredictable. As with any market, companies don't like the prospect of an unstable market, and thus they don't have an incentive to invest in it. Stability allows companies to be confident that they can profit from their investment decisions, and such stability is necessary for a company that is willing to invest in more efficient technologies.
But what has failed to be taken into account is that regulatory approaches lack the necessary incentives to succeed. The problem with regulatory approaches is that they only require cuts to a certain level and provide no long-term incentives for companies to reduce emissions. In essence, if companies do act on the regulatory approaches, they will take the minimum action necessary to meet their regulatory standards instead of investing in the new and most effective technologies. It is clear that the regulatory approach lacks this important profit motive.
And yet, the same argument can be made against market mechanisms. There is no way to prove that using market mechanisms will necessarily create incentives for companies to invest in new technologies. Cap-and-trade systems are buy-in programs, and companies will not automatically buy into such programs. If anything, cap-and-trade systems are less effective because regulatory approaches are mandatory.
I agree to an extent, but the thing is regulatory approaches and standards are a great administrative burden and create a greater government bureaucracy. With this, we can conclude that because of the administrative burden, there is no way to ensure proper regulation. Regulations are always complex and burdensome. Market mechanisms appeal to companies and consumers' self-interests and profit margins. A massive and expensive administrative system is needed to frame and enforce the regulations, imposing unnecessary costs upon our economy.
Now, that's a very good point, but if you logically think about it, a market mechanism such as a cap-and-trade system demands the creation of a large and highly complicated administrative bureaucracy. It requires that the government determines the emissions baseline for such companies, the allocation of carbon credits, and the monitoring and enforcement of everything. It is clear that the regulatory approaches would require much less oversight.
That's debatable, but unlike regulatory approaches, market mechanisms are fair to free market enterprises. Emission standards and regulation may favor one element of an energy industry over another, creating an environment in which the specific technologies are excluded, and others are unfavorably favored, yielding inequitable advantages. However, through market mechanisms, all environmentally sound technologies are treated the same way. When the government takes control over an industry's ability to function freely, it naturally forms a monopoly for the enterprise it believes is best suited to the task.
But isn't that why we elected officials to the government in the first place? In electing officials, we place our trust in their decision-making and in their ability to take actions that are best for us. That is the purpose of our government, to act in our best interest.
Perhaps, but that's an issue for another time altogether. We'll take up the responsibilities of the government and the rights of the American people at another time. For now, we seem to be out of time. Thank you for watching the McLaughlin Group.